Well, thank you.
Born and raised in Buffalo, New York, Amy Koppmann always had a love for photography, starting with her first 110 camera. The majority of her allowance went to film and developing. In high school, she took photography classes with her Ricoh 35mm and learned darkroom developing. After high school, she started working at a local electronics store selling TVs, VCRs, and shoulder mount VHS camcorders. After graduating from college with a BS in biology, Amy realized that her medical school dreams were not going to become true, so she kept working at the same retail electronics store, and after 3 years, her Sony rep at the store let her know of a job opening at Sony, which she gladly leapt on. That was over 23 years ago, and she hasn't looked back since. She's still living in Buffalo with her husband Carl, where they share a passion for collecting and fixing old cars and antique jukeboxes, and spending time mountain biking, rock climbing, and spending time outdoors on the water.
That's pretty much me in a nutshell. I'm a very, very weird individual, to say the least. But yes, my name is Amy Koppmann. I am the Senior Pro Support Rep covering basically all of New England, Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, because it's only a 4.5-hour drive across Canada for me to go from one to the other. So they're like, hey, you're close. You get Michigan too. But it's a cool state, so I'm all for having that. So the presentation today is a little bit of things that I've run across, and I've also picked my coworkers' brains as well, because we have to do these presentations a lot, and there's the common features on the cameras that everybody knows, and then there's always the oh my God, I didn't know my camera did that. Or, what do you mean, I can just do that, and this will save me a whole boatload of work. So that's what this is gonna be. I'm gonna start out with something that I like to call a bit of alpha trivia. Nobody in my family will do trivia with me, regardless of what class it is, or what type of trivia. I just like to know how things work, and I think that's why, my degree's in biology, and I enjoyed doing that for so long. But when looking at our model numbers, ILCE, interchangeable lens camera, so that's a more photo-specific device. ILME, movie-specific device. So you'll see ILME FX30 or FX3 or FX6. SEL stands for Sony E-mount lens. Pretty simple. And then where does E-mount come from? Well, this is a whole story in and of itself. But when Sony acquired Minolta in 2006, we basically took over the Minolta, what in the US was called A-mount, but in Japan was actually called the Alpha mount system. So we built on that for a while with our DSLR and our translucent mirror systems. We decided that having that DSLR design could only take us so far, so we decided to jump into mirrorless. So we decided to call it E-mount because it stood for 18mm flange back distance. So there is a real logic to that, and if you have been with Sony or are familiar with some of our older Sony cameras, everybody used to call them the NEX system, the Sony NEX whatever. NEX stood for New E-mount Experience. So there is some logic, like I said, behind the scenes here to some of the stuff we do. So one of the things that we have been working with as of late in our cameras is really developing new types of sensors. And I'm bringing this up because we did just start shipping earlier this year our Alpha 9 Mark III camera, which is the one I'm using here, and I'll be connected up for demos. And that camera is unique in that it's the world's first full-frame interchangeable lens camera with global shutter. And what does that mean for you? What does that, what's the big benefit of that? Well, we're gonna kind of have to step back a little bit. So when we switched over, or when the world switched over from DSLR to mirrorless, and when cameras actually switched over from just shooting photo to video, electronic shutters came on the scene. And any camera, whether it's a DSLR or it is a mirrorless camera, when you're shooting video is always going to use an electronic shutter. So there's no physical opening or closing. The camera is basically pulling data off the image sensor kind of line by line. It's, one line, two line striping it, pulling it off. In, 2000 and many years ago, when we announced the Alpha 9, I can't remember how long ago that was the first camera to have what was called an anti-distortion shutter. And how that was accomplished is the image sensor was the same, but the image sensor got its own dedicated brain in addition to the processor in the camera. So the camera has two brains, one just for the image sensor and one just for the camera, the rest of the functions in the camera itself. And what that allowed us to do is actually read the data off the sensor about 8 times faster than a traditional imaging sensor. So when you had a fast-moving subject with a traditional sensor, or you still have a fast-moving subject with most sensors today, depending on the readout speed, you may get some weird distortion. And you see this frequently if you've got helicopter propeller blades or anything, ceiling fan, anything that's spinning, it gets this weird kind of wonky, distorted look to it. A stacked sensor will help to eliminate most of that, but it can't eliminate it completely. So that's where this global shutter comes in. So a global shutter is pulling all the data off the image sensor at one time. So that is going to completely eliminate that distortion. It's going to completely eliminate any of that funky artifacting, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute, any of that weird banding or striping that you sometimes get. So that's why this camera is unique in that sense. It is the only camera that has that function though, and depending on what you're shooting, you may or may not need it. But just kind of thought I would bring that in here because a lot of times when talking to people, they're like, yeah, I heard it has global shutter. I have no idea what exactly that means. What are the benefits for me? So benefits of a global shutter, once again, no distortion in photo or video. That also allows us a maximum flash sync speed of up to 1/80,000th of a second. So yeah, pretty insane kind of things. And the feature that most people look at on the camera, which I'm not going to say is not useful because it's really cool, is that the camera can actually shoot 120 frames per second at full resolution with autofocus and auto exposure for every shot. But a lot of people say, I don't know what I'm shooting that's going to be at 120 frames per second. I don't need that. That's fine. That's just one aspect of what global shutter brings to you. So, getting to the very basics of the camera, and now this is kind of tricky because every camera is just a little bit different. Some cameras this will work for, some won't, depending on what generation. But this is one I use all the time. I always format my cards once I'm done with them. A lot of people say, well, I just move the images to my computer and just delete them that way. Not necessarily a good move. When you format your card, it's basically like bleaching it. You're getting rid of all the artifacts, all the old junk that could be on there. And on your cameras, for the most part, you have to go into your menu, move down a few spots, find your format option. It's in here somewhere. Oh, there we go. Over to format. Well, we have a much easier way to do that. So just by holding down the menu button and the trash can button, that will immediately take you to your format option. So quick and easy. I don't know why we don't really call this one out more. I don't even think it's in our manuals, but it is a nice.
I looked and I had to look on the Facebook groups to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You're in the club now. Just don't go telling anybody.
What else am I missing?
Card sorting. Another thing that a lot of people aren't necessarily familiar with. Yes, the camera has 2 card slots, or most of the cameras have 2 card slots. With the most recent generation, they can take either the SD card or the CF Express Type A. But when it comes to the actual capability of what you can do with those card slots, a lot of people don't necessarily know that you can sort your media this way. So, recording media settings. So I can tell it to just put my photos on one card and just put my videos on the other. So maybe I'm giving, I have one editor for photo, one for video. I can sort it out nice and neat like that. I can have it not auto switch media cards. So when it's on auto switch, when one card gets filled up, it would automatically go to the next. But maybe I don't want it to do that. I want to make sure I have certain cards for certain things. It will, at this point, if I have auto switch off, it'll just tell me card is full, replace card. It won't just keep going in the process. You also have simultaneous recording. So each card is getting a copy, an identical copy of what's going on both. So once again, maybe you've got two different people, two different editors, somebody shooting the content, and you want two people to have exactly the same content to work with. That's where simultaneous recording would come in. And then you can also sort, like right now, let's see if I do.
When you do simultaneous, the file names are also the same?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
so-
they are
so if we
carbon
do one
copies of each
name,
other.
Then we're good, we'll be dealing with the same ones.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so image, look at image number 42. Here's image number 42, and you're both looking at identically the same ones. You also have the options to change your settings here. So maybe in slot 1, I only want it to do RAW, and in slot 2, I only want it to be my JPEGs. I can sort them like that as well. So you really have a lot of flexibility here, other than just shoving two cards in and going ahead, whoops, and trying to sort it out on your own. You can have the camera actually do some of the work for you. Media cards are the other kind of tricky thing. Everybody wants to know, which card do I have to use, especially when we first started using CF Express Type A. We use CF Express Type A versus Type B, mainly because the size is virtually identical, and it lets us use one slot for both types of media. So you can have matched media, or you can be like me in like every other aspect of my life and have something mismatched. So I can use, I generally use the CF Express Type A for my video, and the SD card for my still images. Benefits of one versus the other: CF Express Type A is going to be much faster in every instance. It just has that innate ability, which is why we went with it in the cameras. Obviously, that comes at a little bit of a price, meaning that the CF Express Type A is, CF Express Type A is going to be more expensive. So sizes are a little bit different than with SD card, but you're basically looking at about $350 for a 160 gig card. So it's not the cheapest out there, but it is also future-proof in that sense, that it will do everything and more that the camera can throw at it. Once again, for most instances, you don't need to use this, but with the newer cameras that can shoot, say, at 120 frames per second, it's going to offer you faster buffering, faster cleaning of your buffer. It also, in the case of recording video, if you're recording in all iframe, which means that when you're shooting video, each frame is not being compressed. You're going to have much larger file sizes. And in that instance, when you're doing that, especially in slow and quick mode, you will need to use the CF Express Type A cards. But don't think about, if I buy a new camera, I have to have this. You can use your regular SD cards as is. I usually recommend, when you're looking at SD cards, to go SDXC at a minimum, and the manual will tell you that 60 is kind of the baseline that you need to go at, the V60 cards, but I always go V90, because I don't want to be stuck somewhere where the camera all of a sudden says, hey, Mike, I'm not quite fast enough to be able to do what you want to do. And the V90 are pretty affordable at this point, so that's kind of the big thing I look for there. I never look for when cards say like super fast, ultra fast, turbo, whatever, 189x speed, because you have no idea what they're comparing it to. I could say I'm 4 times faster. What am I 4 times faster than? The turtle that was rolling down my driveway the other day? Yes.
Well, I've always looked at V right.
Correct.
But is V90 essentially a shorthand for that?
V90 is a video class speed,
Okay.
so it won't necessarily give you exact numbers for this, but it will give you numbers in a much faster range. So versus like a 80 write and or 80 read and 90 write speed that you might get with like a V30, you're kind of guaranteed a minimum performance right there. And with CF Express Type A, our manuals will once again say VPG, which is Video Performance Group, 200, but every Sony branded card and most of the CF Express Type A cards out there will be 400 speed. They'll have that little indicator up there. So you really don't have to worry too much about the CF Express Type A cards, that once you buy them, they're pretty much all the same. It's just SD, you've got SDXC, HC, V90, U3, UHS2, there's like all sorts of hieroglyphics on there. I always look at just this V speed, that V performance on there. So when recording video, one of the biggest questions we always get is, how do I prevent the camera from overheating? Or I hear the camera heats up when it does this, how do I take care of that? Well, the easiest solution would be to go to a camera specifically designed for video. Something like our FX30, FX3 that actually has a cooling fan built in. That's kind of hard to find in a lot of cameras, especially if you're doing hybrid. You've got this camera for shooting video and stills. You do a little bit of both. So how do you basically increase the amount of record time before the camera essentially overheats or heats up too much to the point where it wants to stop working? There's a couple easy solutions that everybody will tell you. Number one, open the LCD screen. Get it away from the camera. That gives you a bigger surface area. The other is open the battery door. And, flip it open on the bottom. That will let you dissipate a little bit of heat. Use a vertical grip is another option. Open the SD card slot. That's okay, so now you're just throwing every door on the camera open. The easiest things to do, number one, use a vertical grip, because now you've taken that battery from being inside the camera and taken it external. But the best thing to do with our cameras and with any camera, for the most part, if it's supported, is use an external power supply. So that battery bank that you use to charge up your phone while you're out traveling or you're on the plane, get one of those and use that to power your camera. Because when you are shooting video, especially 4K or 8K, and especially at high frame rates, your image sensor is getting hot because it's being asked to do a lot of processing just on the image sensor itself. The processor in the camera is getting hot because now it has to do something with all that data coming in. The battery's getting hot because it's asked to be, it's being asked to provide a lot of power for all that processing in the camera. Your SD card is getting hot because there's a lot of data being written to it. So it's just heating itself up right in there. If you can use one of those external power banks that, like I said, like you use for your phone, I use this one, which is, I think, a 20,000 milliamp. This will power a couple different things. I have been able to take my regular Alpha 7 IV camera and do over 5 hours of continuous recording with no power shutdown whatsoever due to overheating. Because now all the power is being provided by this, or 99% of the power, depending on which camera you're shooting, is being provided by this. Yes?
Does there still have to be a battery in the compartment?
Yes, it does. You need to complete the circuit. Yeah, now, once again, depending on what camera you're shooting, the newer cameras all support USB with power delivery, which is USB PD. If you're shooting like an Alpha 7 III, Alpha 7 R4, any of like the first, second, third generations, those for the most part won't support power delivery. So this will only be supplementing the battery in the camera. So they'll both be being used up. But that's still going to give you a longer record time than just relying on that little battery in the camera. Plus, this, I think this was about $50 for me at B&H, the store we all know and love. This, I personally, and I know none of my coworkers are here, so I will say it. I would rather have something like this. This is multi-purpose, instead of just buying more batteries for the camera that can only be used in my camera. I'm charging my tablet with this on the plane, my headphones. I duct tape it to my tripod when I'm shooting video, and just let it run and let it power the camera for 99% of its functionality. So that USB with power delivery is, like I said, on all our current cameras, and it will provide, once again, most, if not all of the power that the camera needs, because it's a much higher throughput of energy. It is only through USB-C. So if your camera still has a micro USB port on it and USB-C, power delivery is only over USB-C. Why do we still do micro USB? Because we make remotes and other accessories that plug in via that USB-C multi-port. Or If you're streaming and you want to power the camera at the same time, you can use both ports at the same time, or if you're tethered, that's the reason we keep that on there. But that USB-C with power delivery is on pretty much every single of the current generation of cameras. My menu, the cute little star menu at the top of the page when you hit the menu button. This will allow you to put the features you use most often in one place, so that you don't have to dig through the menus every time. Or if maybe you are, it's your camera, but you have to give it to somebody else to use all the time. You can tell them that shortcut for formatting, they may not remember it. You can just go ahead and throw it in the My Menu. So, pretty easy setup. You go into My Menu. I currently only have one tab on this because I just reset my camera. So I'm going to go ahead and add format in there. I just go down to My Menu, add item, and then I dig through all the options that I have. I know what I'm looking for is going to be up here. Let's go to media, format. Now I could make a whole nother page. So one could be kind of my camera settings, two could just be my format page, which I'll do that. So now when I go back to my menu, that silver star at the top, page 1 is my funkier settings. Page 2 is just my format option. So it's a lot easier, once again, than digging through everything. Yes?
You can also save these, right? So if I send it to be serviced, or I never got that straight.
Yes, that's coming.
Okay.
Because that's another one that, yeah, another kind of tricky little thing in there. Bright monitoring. This is incredibly useful, but you will not find it in the menu, which is the tricky part, which I don't know why. But if you've ever tried to shoot the Milky Way or shoot at night and tried to frame up the shot properly, most times it usually involves take a picture, look at it, nope, not right, I'm going to move the camera a little bit, try it again, try it again. Bright monitoring basically will temporarily, while you're framing your shot, bump up the ISO, so kind of give you the ability to frame out your shot. Once you let go of whatever button you've assigned it to, it'll go back to whatever settings you've made and allow you to take the picture. So as I just kind of hinted at there, bright monitoring is something you have to assign to a button on the camera. So I'm going to, go into my menu, and this is something we'll talk about in a minute here as well, but I have customized a button on my camera, in this case, the button labeled number, or identified as number 2 here. Oops, try it again. Button identified here as button number 2 is my bright monitoring setting. So all I have to do when I need to use that bright monitoring, a situation like this maybe, I can't see what I'm doing, and put it into manual focus, that's right. And turn off variable shutter, because I'm doing all sorts of stuff here with this camera. Okay, let's try that again. See that little moon and stars that appeared up there, up next to manual focus up at the top? That tells me I'm in my bright monitoring mode right now. So, obviously it's not very dark in here, but anywhere really dark to do this with. It would just basically allow me to frame the shot up much better and much easier without having to take multiple shots in the process. But once again, that is something you do have to assign to a custom button. It's not something you can just go into your menu and turn on. Something that's come into play a lot recently is, and we read all sorts of forums and we answer. If you're on the Sony Alpha Facebook page, myself and my coworkers were the people that answer those questions on there a lot of times. This is one that we get a lot. What happened to my pictures? I didn't see that when I was taking the pictures. Why do I have stripes on my pictures? Well, you can thank the prevalence of LED lights and fluorescent lights for this, something we didn't have to worry about when we were using the old energy hogging, traditional incandescent bulbs. But these lights, all these lights in this room are flickering, whether you can see it with your own eyes or not. In the US, they tend to cycle or flicker at a 60 times per second or a multiple of 60, so 60 or 120 frames per second. And basically, what's happening is the camera is sensing, it is actually seeing the flickering of the lights that you're not seeing. So it's giving you that. So we have a function on the cameras called anti-flicker. And anti-flicker is for photo only. But what it does is it basically will allow you to kind of half push the shutter button, detect the flicker, and then once you push the shutter button to take the picture, there may be a slight lag there, like less than 1/60th of a second. Well, it determines, okay, I see the light is flickering, when is it at its brightest point? And that's when it captures the image. So you're going to virtually eliminate any of that flickering that you would get with the lights. Now, anti-flicker or flickering is something that is not going to be seen on the Alpha 9 III with global shutter. It'll be minimally seen on any of our other Alpha 9 or Alpha 1 cameras that use stack sensor. But if you're using electronic shutter with any of our, kind of the mainline cameras, any of our Alpha 7 series cameras, you are going to be slightly susceptible to this. So all I have to do is go into my menu and go to my camera settings, go down to shutter, and then anti-flicker. I can turn that on. So once again, anti-flicker is only for photo. And since this is something I use often, like I said, I put it in my menu setting there.
You can also go to the function menu.
Yes, yes. I just have other things that I like in my function menu that it lost out. It lost the battle on that one. It got bumped to the, and this is something, this is one of the professional photographers at the US Open shooting against these panels, which are, they wrap around the whole stadium. They're whole LED display panels around. And when you're in there, it's this beautiful continuous blue. When you take photos of it, it's this beautiful stripy blue that you're getting. And this was, I've been at the US Open the past 2 years. This is the #1 complaint people have with every manufacturer. Why am I seeing these stripes? Well, how can you eliminate it? Global shutter, for one, but if you don't want to trade in your camera necessarily, we do have the anti-flicker setting in the camera that will help to reduce and or eliminate that. So there's 2 different ways we can do that. And this is for both photo and video. So the anti-flicker is photo only. Variable shutter, turn that off. It can be used for both photo and video. And that will allow me to dial in a very funky shutter speed. So it takes, sorry, I threw the podium in the wrong spot, I apologize. So yeah, right now I'm at 1/695th.4 of a second. I can just keep dialing in until I get something that actually looks like the flickering or the banding has been eliminated or significantly reduced. Or in some scenarios, if you're shooting a monitor, of course I pick a nice wide lens, I have something called, anti-flicker TV scan, which is the one I use most often because it's just pretty darn cool. And you can see it says anti-flicker TV scan there in the middle. What that does is when I push that, the camera is going to go ahead and do a quick look at the monitor or the screen and see how fast or how slow it's flickering and essentially dial that in for me. So I do that and, you can see how the shutter speed was changing a little bit and now it's locked itself in at 1/785th.5 of a second. So that's what it's going to use for the shutter speed. to virtually eliminate that. So 2 kind of nice things to have. Talking to a bunch of people here this week said, yeah, you know, we were shooting at graduation and everything was going well and good, except they had the big monitors displayed behind the people, and now all of a sudden I'm getting this weird, you know, striping that I didn't see in the moment because I'm, you know, concentrating on the subject and the content. So that variable shutter and anti-flicker TV scan, 2 very good things for getting rid of that banding and or striping. So as you were kind of speaking, function menu and button customization, 2 things that I really do on every single one of my cameras, and there is no right or wrong here. As my coworkers and I, we will always, you know, pick up each other's cameras and just harass each other for this. Like, why do you have, you know, audio level in there? You don't do video. Well, you know, so it's kind of a fun thing because everybody wants to know, like, well, what do I put in here? And there's all sorts of online tutorials where people will say, oh, well, this is how mine is set up, and this is what I use, and this is how you should set it up. No. You know, you don't go to the grocery store and buy something off every shelf because somebody told you, you know, this is what I needed to make dinner tonight. You know, your tastes are different, your needs are different, so how you're going to set up the camera is going to be completely different as well. But this is something that I find makes the biggest difference when moving from one camera to another, or even moving from one manufacturer to another, to kind of set up the camera exactly how you want it to be. So you can have the camera's buttons act one way in photo, one way in video, one way in playback. So this is great if it's a camera that's maybe being used by multiple people, or it's kind of in a lone pool. You know, you can kind of come to a happy medium on like what people want in the video settings, what people want in their photo settings. The function menu, you know, this is currently what mine looks like. I have a love-hate relationship with touch screens, so I made it really accessible to turn it off and on. Normally I don't use it, but there's times when shooting video that I absolutely need it. You know, changing between what the camera is recognizing for my subject, that's in there. So function menu is the things you're probably going to use most often, but don't need immediate access to, like with a regular button on the camera. Otherwise, all the buttons labeled C on the camera, so C1, C2, those can all be set up. If you're using a lens that has what normally would be a focus hold button on there, which is how it kind of comes preset out of the box, you can also change that as well. So I have mine to toggle between crop and full frame, so I can give myself a little more zoom there if I want it. But that would only be active if you have a lens on there with that button. So make it something that you may not, you know, need all the time, but you want kind of convenient access to. With the cameras themselves, now for, I don't know, the past 10 years or so, all of our cameras have had Wi-Fi built in. And Wi-Fi obviously lets you transfer images to your smartphone or tablet. It lets you use your smartphone or tablet as a remote control. What a lot of people don't realize too is that it allows you to add GPS information to your images. So most manufacturers, I think at this point, have taken GPS out of the cameras. And believe it or not, one of the reasons for that was selling to the US government. They always want things disabled. They want us to make cameras, and everybody to make cameras without Wi-Fi in them so they can't be hacked and tapped into and that sort of stuff. Taking the GPS out was one easy option because we could always just use tethering to your smartphone or tablet to do that. Now there's 2 different programs or 2 different apps that you can use to tether with your smartphone or tablet. It depends on what camera you have, and because, well, the reason for that is the newer cameras have a different processor in them, different brain in them, and they can interact with the app in different ways. So if you have one of the more recent cameras, you were probably using Imaging Edge Mobile. When you update the firmware on your camera, you will have to update to the Creators app. And the reason for that is that it also allows you to do things like import LUTs into the camera, which the previous app didn't allow you to do. Allows you to import upgrade licenses. So if you want to add in 4K DCI, you can do that on some of our cameras by using the app to do that. But This app only works, once again, with these cameras, and in this case, some of these cameras did get a firmware update, which allowed them to use the Creators app. Otherwise, you're using Imaging Edge Mobile. It used to be an orange logo with a little ball on it. We've changed the look of it, the logo, but still same ideas. Lets you transfer your images or video to smartphone or tablet, use it as a remote control, add GPS location information. If you're using one of our lenses that's a power zoom lens, like the 1635 or any lens that has PZ in the model number, this will actually pop up at that point a zoom lever on here. So you can actually control the camera's zoom from across the room because you are using a power zoom lens.
All my cameras are just they're not one of the newest ones you listed there, so I use this. But
Yes.
I have maybe 30% trouble getting it to connect. So maybe later.
Yeah.
Figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah, sometimes it's the Bluetooth connectivity. Sometimes if you're trying to do it in a busy situation, we always joke that like trade shows are the worst, or like even here's the worst place to demo stuff because everybody has Wi-Fi. Everybody, I have 2 phones, 2 computers, 2 tablets on me, and God knows how many computers, and they're just all fighting for the same Wi-Fi signal. But adding the Bluetooth in there will, and the reason we use the Bluetooth in there, the Bluetooth isn't actually doing the transferring, it's Wi-Fi that's doing the transferring. The Bluetooth is like a connection or a leash that says, hey, I'm gonna hold on to you and we'll transfer as long as the Bluetooth is connected. So sometimes that can be a little trickier.
So if I'm in like a commencement where there's tons of people, if my Bluetooth is activated, I may still have some trouble.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah,
That what it's like.
yeah, the computer or the Consumer Electronics Show or any photo trade show is the worst place to do a demo, and everybody wants to see demos. And
But the newer creative app and the newer cameras, is that a little more robust?
it is a little more robust on there. Also, the newer cameras are using the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi bands, so that gives a little more security. They can choose one or the other depending on which is the strongest. Something that may or may not appeal to you, depending on what your content is custom grid lines. And this is something we added for, once again, select cameras in the lineup. And this is one that people are very polarized on. When we announced this, the big pushback we got is, oh my God, they want to charge me $150 to put grid lines in my camera. My camera already has grid lines. This is the biggest waste of money ever. Well, if you're a portrait or a ID photographer, school portrait photographer, cruise ship photographer, team photographer, this allows you to make your own grid lines for the look that you want. So maybe for your team photos, you always have your school's logo here on the side. You could actually make your own custom grid line with your school's logo on the side, so as you're shooting it, you can exactly see how that content is going to appear. So do you have to have it? No, but in certain instances, is it nice? Yes. I mean, you could make one that basically masks out everything except for the shape of a person's head in the very middle of the screen. So when you have to give it to somebody else in some other department to do ID photos, just make sure you can see their face, and that's it, and then push the button, and that's it. Yes?
That $150, is that per camera, or can I put it on all?
It's
4 or 5?
per camera.
Okay.
Yes. Unless you live in Canada, then it's $202, a nice round number right there. But yes, you can create your own. You can store 4 in the camera at any given point. You can have them in different colors too, so you could have like like I said, you could have your full color logo here, and then maybe a warning area and red at the top and the bottom. So it's really meant for repeated kind of, step and repeat kind of photo use. Yeah, exactly. And because I've worked with some of the larger school portrait companies for like elementary schools and that, they're not always photographers necessarily. They're more button pushers. Like sit down, get your head in the circle, take the picture, repeat. So it's kind of meant for that sort of thing. But it is an option that we do have, and it works for photo and video, and it allows you to see it either on the screen in the viewfinder, or maybe you have a large, monitor next to it, so it will go through the HDMI out. So it won't be a clean HDMI out in that sense, because it will give you the grid lines.
But it won't actually put the logo on the image, but it's just there as a visual aid.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. All right, one other funky custom thing that people don't use very often, and I find this incredibly useful. On the top of your camera, on most of the cameras, you have 1, 2, and 3, your custom recalls. Well, you can actually essentially assign that to a button on the camera. So why would that be useful? A couple weeks ago, I was at Kentucky Derby, and my second time, I learned a lot. I didn't realize it wasn't just one horse race. There's like 12 or 13 of them throughout the day, number one. Number two, there's no like warning when the horses are going off. All of a sudden, we're sitting right there on the track, and all of a sudden they're like racing towards us. So things change really quickly. I'm sitting out there waiting for the race. There are a lot of hats, a lot of interesting people to look at. So I have one set of settings for that. I have another set of settings when I'm shooting the horses in the racing. Instead of having to toggle between 1 and 2 on the top of the camera here, I can actually assign it, and I forget what button I assigned it to on my camera. I assigned it to my custom 3 button. So right now, the camera is set in manual focus, it's set in shutter priority. When I press my custom 3 button, you can see my settings change completely. I'm in autofocus continuous, I'm in full manual priority, I'm in spot focus. All my settings have changed. So how do we set this up? It's kind of a 2-part process. So we are going to go into, our camera settings. So our pink menu. Where am I going? Shooting mode. So those would be my normal ones. For the buttons on the top of the camera, this is for that one-time custom. So I'm in custom hold 1, and here I can change absolutely everything. So I want to go, we'll say to aperture priority. What aperture do I want? Now, once again, this is dependent on the lens that I'm using, so I may not have access to all of these. I'm going to go with f1, just for the fun of it. This camera, because we do have the high-speed burst mode on there, I can say I want it at 120 frames per second. I can set my ISO. I can set all these different things about this shooting scenario, and then I would go down to register, and that would save it. So whenever I hit that custom button again, everything that I've set up here will temporarily appear.
Are you holding that button and
Yes,
shooting? Okay.
yes,
It's not a toggle. You have to-
correct,
okay.
yes.
This is for the button, you've already got the C1 set.
Only because I did this yesterday. I set this in here.
Okay.
So I assigned it, this is custom function 1. I've assigned it to my C3 button on the back of the camera.
I get confused by the language of the
Mhm.
recall is saying you're recalling it to a button,
Yes.
but then when you program it, what's that called? Because I wish I'd never been able to do the YouTube video and figure this out, and actually would be very useful.
Yeah. So when you see the MR, those are the ones that are assigned to the physical dial on the top. We're doing this custom shoot setting, which I think when you see the custom hold, that means you're holding the button down to access it. So that's where I went, like I said, I went yesterday, I set up a whole bunch of stuff.
You know, the friend who sets her one of the plans, she calls it her oh shit button.
Yes, exactly. I've also heard it called that too.
So like,
Yeah.
wow, what the hell's happening?
Yep, exactly.
And these are completely separate from your memory recall.
Correct.
slots.
Yes. Yeah.
So, just so I'm repeating back and understanding, so if you push, what was that, C3?
You could assign it to just about any button on the camera. I just wasn't using this button for anything. So
Okay.
I made it my C3.
But what I mean is like, say it's C3.
Mhm.
If you push C3, that's one thing, but if you push and hold C3, it's this. Is that what I'm understanding?
No, it will
Okay.
right now be, the C3 is only this function, but I have to hold it to access it.
Gotcha, okay.
But that's a good question though, like can it also be a toggle button? If you just push it, it does a thing. And also if you push and hold, it
No.
does another. So if you have all of your buttons employed with just toggles,
Yes,
then you're gonna have a hard time doing this,
correct,
because you won't have a button available.
correct. So you could assign it maybe to that button on the lens, you know, if you have that. Yep, yep, something that wouldn't necessarily change. But once again, this is something, you know, like you said, it's your, oh, heck button. That, you know, and I find that a lot, because, you know, I loan my camera out to people are playing with it, various people are using it, and all of a sudden it's like, wait, what are my settings? You know, I was shooting my brother's kids at swim lessons the other day, and I forgot that I had given my camera out to somebody, and I pick it up, and I'm like, why are the shots all blurry? Oh, they're at ISO 100, I'm shooting indoor, you know, like, I had come back from a trip, I literally got off the plane, ran to the swim lessons, and I'm like, oh, it's my camera, I'm good to go, and I'm not. So, as you were kind of talking about, I think it's the next one here, yes, saving and loading settings. So, this is something we actually do with our AP photographers. So the AP has gone completely to Sony. They have a specific set of settings that they all have saved to their card that the AP wants them to use. So all they have to do is put that SD card into their camera and go into the menu and say, load the settings off that card. That way everybody's camera is set exactly the same.
That's all of the settings?
Most, I would say 99% of the settings. There are certain settings, there's like a couple weird quirky ones that won't be in there, but you know,
This will save you like a whole day.
Yes, but here's the caveat, it has to be the same model of camera.
Okay.
So it would be Alpha 7.4 to Alpha 7.4, Alpha 1 to Alpha 1. You can't mix between like an Alpha 1 and an Alpha 7.4.
Same model, same generation, or like a A7R 4 and 5?
Same model, yes. Yeah, now, you also would want to make sure that the firmware is up to date, because you may have something set on a camera with current firmware that wasn't available on previous firmware. But yeah, this is incredibly useful. I keep a couple of these, oh darn cards in my bag with like my settings now. So those old 16 gig cards that you don't know what to do with, I keep one for firmware updates, and I keep another one with my settings on it. Also, if you do a firmware update, 99% of the time it's not going to wipe out your settings. We will tell you in the firmware instructions, like, save your settings, this will reformat everything in there, but I like to do it anyway. I like to just kind of, you know, save all my settings to a card. I know some people have saved, you know, like, okay, I'm going to the Kentucky Derby again. I saved all my settings from last year, I found what worked for me, and I can actually name those and save those in that card. You know, graduation file, that we know it's always at the same spot, this is what I'm going to do. Basketball, this is, you know, for this scenario, this is what works, and you can save and load those as needed. Yeah.
So the save setting, is that one setting per card, or can you save a few different?
No,
settings
you can
in the
save
same
multiples. So, I will save mine. You could also save it to the cloud if you want, if you're connected. I just prefer media. I don't know, I'm kind of old school. I like something tangible that I can touch. And then you can, so like I said, you can give it a name. You can save numerous on there.
Like sports settings.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah, concerts, you know, whatever it may be.
what is your name?
If you're using CF Express for everything, you could just leave a regular SD with every different person's settings in the car, right?
Yep.
And then just load it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Are you going to cover setting the C1, C2, or I can ask you later?
Yeah, I can do.
I don't, you don't know this question. Very motivated, but we'll do that another time.
Yeah. So, like on this camera, C1 and C2 are on my top. So that's my C1
Oh, I'm
button.
sorry, we had like a custom on
The M1.
Oh,
Yeah,
the
sorry,
M1 on the
sorry.
top.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to, but
We
let
can
me
do this
see.
later.
Yeah,
Later,
so we're
we-
running.
So
This
it's
is
fun
a
to
very,
wrap up
very,
anyway, so if you
Yeah.
very
wanna
personal
do that.
frustration.
Then a couple quick things I'll talk about. If your camera doesn't ask you when you are setting it up, do you want to turn your auto temperature power off to high? Yes, you do. If it's not on high right now, turn it to high. It's some sort of legal thing that we couldn't set it to high. By default, basically, the camera may get a little extra warm in your hands, a little uncomfortable, but it's still going to not shut down until it's at risk of damaging itself. It won't allow itself to spontaneously combust, which is a good thing. Proxy recording, if you're not familiar with this is incredibly useful if you're trying to edit on especially an older computer or something that doesn't have as much processing power. You can shoot your full resolution video and then a significantly smaller proxy file. Take your proxy file into your editing program, make all your cuts, do whatever, strip out that proxy file, throw your full resolution video back in there. So you're editing with a much smaller, much more compact and easier to handle file. All of our cameras can be used as a webcam. Most current generation, you don't need any additional software. Just plug in a USB-C. Big benefit of this, I use this all the time. You can use nice lenses. You can use the microphone that's on your camera as well. So I use a wireless mic because I'm moving around my office a lot, so I don't have to be extra close to it. If you have older cameras, and by older I mean not current generation, you may have to install different software to do that, called Imaging Edge Webcam, but you can still allows you to use your camera as a webcam. And one thing that came up, if you do want to clean your own cameras, I very rarely do because I don't trust myself 100%, but if there's something really bad and you're going beyond using the blower, go into cleaning mode on your camera. That is going to shake the sensor at a very high frequency, but then it is going to lock it in position. Do not turn off the camera until after you have cleaned the sensor, because the sensor is moving on electromagnets in there. If you try to clean the sensor while the camera is turned off, you're fighting against the electromagnets on there, and you can actually end up scratching your sensor. So, very kind of specialized, but yes. Yes, if you are going to manually try to clean your sensor with a sensor swab, something beyond using a blower, go into the cleaning mode on the camera. Camera's going to vibrate, shake the dust loose, but then it is going to lock the sensor in position using the electromagnets.
Okay. Do not turn it off.
Until you are done.
Because
And
those magnets will release and you're going to be moving it around.
yes, and the camera will actually tell you that when you go to do the cleanings. That's in setup, anti-dust function, sensor cleaning. It'll take a minute, but then it'll say, there you go, turn power off after cleaning the image sensor manually.
It's terrifying, but I've done it a couple times, and it would be hard to mess your sensor up. But just be careful, don't have anything around it fall over.
Do not use Windex. I've seen that happen.
Oh, definitely get it online specifically for it.
Yes, yeah.
The swab with the exact width of your sensor, so you do one pass. It comes with the solution that you put in the swab. But don't use anything like you found around your house.
Yeah, no Q-tips on there, sensor swabs only, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll give
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Awesome.
and Amy will be around for the rest of the day, correct?
Yeah.
Until, she'll be at the banquet tonight, so if you have more questions,
Yes?
go ahead and ask her.
Yeah.